Hello and welcome back to Hawk TV News Online. I'm your host Josh Chanley and I'm joined by Aaron Mulligan and Josh Miller. And today we're going to be discussing, of course, the election, which is a week from today. So, everyone, hope everyone's doing really well, especially now that we're home and hanging out. But we are still going to provide the news to our lovely viewers. So, Aaron, I'm going to start off with you. So, based on the polls that are out, look, we look at the last election, we think about polls. Sometimes they're a bit off, so maybe they're a bit apprehensive this year, this time around, because they don't want to have such a large margin of error. So, Aaron, based on these polls, what do you think? Who do you think is going to win?
To be honest, so far, I'm not entirely surprised that Biden's winning most of them. Right now, Trump, I think he has Ohio and Iowa. Because I think it's just kind of popular in the Democratic Party to go out and vote early as of right now.
Right.
But I do think COVID has something to do with it because people are apprehensive right now. I was surprised about Pennsylvania. I think the voters that have already voted in Pennsylvania might be a little conflicted. I know we might talk about it later, but specifically because of the oil questions during the debate.
Right.
I think Trump could win it in the end, win Pennsylvania. But that was pretty much what I was most surprised about. Florida, it's the ultimate swing state, so
Absolutely,
I think anything could happen.
A true purple state. What do you think about this, Miller?
I think some of the states, Aaron's right. It's going to take a lot of more Democratic voters have voted by mail already. I think New Jersey right now has about 2 million people that have voted by mail at the time of this recording. And that has to do with, obviously the age difference in, I believe that Republican Party, older people are probably more apprehensive about mail-in voting. And also, obviously, Trump's messaging has made it so that it's less enticing to do mail-in voting. But, I think this election is going to be really interesting. We're not going to be able to call it the day of. And I don't know when the last time we were able to do that because of the fact that we have to count all these mail-in votes. So some states we're going to have the answer that day, but other ones it could be a week or more possibly for them to get all the ballots together. So I think it's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it's a problem.
I think the states to watch are going to be, of course, the swing states of PA, and again, like Aaron said, Florida. Florida being such a very diverse state. You have all the retirees and the young families, and it just being in the South. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. But yeah, I think some of the swing states, though, I think Ohio is probably going to go red, I'd have to say. But again, I think PA still kind of up in the air. Right now, they're saying that the polls are saying that they're going to be more leaning blue. But again, we'll see. I don't want to call anything with this election because the last time we did this, Trump won, and everyone was saying Hillary was going to win according to the polling. So this year, I think a lot more people are more apprehensive with the polling in general.
No, absolutely, and I think for good reason. A lot of people don't even answer polls. I'd never gotten a phone call for a poll. I don't know if you guys have. So I'm not really sure what the polling population is. I'm not really sure who they're asking. All we know is that based on last election, we really don't know. And we can use polls as a guide, but who knows? A lot of people aren't even open about their political ideas. There was a study, and I don't know if it was a study, but it was an article by the New York Times saying about 66% of Americans are afraid to express their political point of view. So who really knows if they got a call from these pollsters and they didn't even answer it? So we don't really know. But we'll find out next week, and of course the succeeding weeks afterwards, because like Miller said, we're not going to know the night of. Okay, I worked at the Board of Elections, and when it comes down to processing mail-in ballots, it takes a very, very long time. And the law does not allow them to count these ballots, obviously, beforehand. So they have to wait till election night to open them. But, let's look at the campaign trail itself. President Trump is, honestly, with his background in entertainment, he really knows how to draw in a crowd. So, Aaron, what do you think about these Trump rallies? A lot of people are calling him out saying, oh, how could you do this during COVID? This is such a disregard for what the CDC is saying. But do you think it's really going to help him and make sure that when he goes to these battleground states that he gets the support that he needs?
I think the rallies help him. I think in regards to his supporters, it just makes them love him more. Because I personally feel like in his rallies lately, they've been very laid back. He speaks just off the cuff. He's even dancing now on stage. So I think it just makes them love him more. I also think that it does help him because I think if you just take away your political ideology for a second and you just watch his rallies compared to Biden's, I think it really highlights the differences in their mental states. I think it's no secret that Biden might be struggling a little bit. We don't know really what's going on, but he definitely has talking points. And what really concerned me was that last week he went to a rally in Lucerne County, Pennsylvania. He went up there and he said, "Hello, Dallas." And I get the fact that, you could compare that to a singer, right? You could say singers go and they have, their gigs a bunch of times a week. They could forget where they are. Biden was in his basement for a week and then went to one place and he said Dallas. But Biden's also saying the same things, which Democrats like to hear. With Trump, he just says whatever he wants. So I think his rallies are definitely helping him. And other than that, I mean, he's a showman, so it's no matter what, it's going to help him.
Right. Now, do you believe that the support that President Trump has, and I mean, obviously he has crowds of several thousand people in comparison to Biden's, I mean, do you think it's just because Trump supporters are adamant about seeing the president while Biden supporters, a lot of things, if you go on social media, you can see a lot of people, they aren't super satisfied with Biden as the nominee for the Democratic Party, but they're voting for Biden as a way to vote against Trump. Do you think that's really the reason why we don't see the crowds at Biden's rallies?
Definitely an aspect of it, because I mean, I know that the Democrats would much rather someone else. But I think it's also the COVID, beliefs in both parties. They're polar opposite. Of course, there's going to be people in both parties who maybe aren't as radical about the COVID, issue. But I think with Republicans, they are extremely into their constitutional rights. It's not illegal to not wear a mask technically in public, right? So they don't really care as much, and they kind of look at it as, if we get sick, we'll deal with it when it happens. With Biden supporters, they really are believing in the social distancing and wearing masks, so they don't want to go out in public. I also think there's the mentality that, I don't have to go to a rally just because I love this candidate. I'm going to go vote for whoever I want. So I think it's definitely the mentality of both parties and what they want to see happen regarding COVID and, their beliefs in COVID as well.
Gotcha. What do you think about that, Miller?
Yes. I think that it's mostly about coronavirus and the fact that Democratic voters are probably more likely to try and err on the side of caution when it comes to coronavirus safety and the belief that it's still out there, it's still dangerous, that we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And I also think, part of it is that, Aaron said that, it's more or less Trump's base really loves him and wants to go out and see him, and that not everyone necessarily needs to go out and see their candidate in person. So I don't know if necessarily the Trump rallies, they've been a lot smaller than they have been, just according to the data. And even Leslie Stahl asked about it in her 60-minute interview last week. But I think that these rallies that are smaller, I mean, they're mostly just the Trump lovers. They're his base. They're the ones that were going to vote for him anyway. I don't really see anyone who's in this undecided category going to either rally either way. Especially, again, during the middle of the pandemic. Sure, it's one thing to go to your rally for a candidate that you love and that you really want to express yourself with and go see. But it's another if you don't really care about one or the other. Are you willing to risk that? But yeah, and I also just think it's been different. Trump has been doing typical normal rallies, just maybe some social distancing or doing them outside instead of doing them in arenas. Biden last week did one with Obama where they were outside Philadelphia just doing like a car rally. So again, I think it's just a different way of approaching it, and I think it's, again, mostly has to do with safety concerns and whether or not people feel comfortable going out and just the trends based off of the people that typically align with these two voting parties.
That's actually a great segue off to the debates. We can all agree that this debate, the second and final one, was far more civilized and not as unruly. And for those middle ground voters, those undecided folks, maybe they can really figure out who they want to support in this election. Because I think in regards to talking about policy, I mean, given in the 2-minute time frame, I think we got a lot more out of each candidate. But let's talk about coronavirus and each candidate's response to COVID. So it's like, so Aaron, can you like spat off some of the main points made by Trump?
Yeah, I mean, he does not want to mandate masks, and he firmly believes that we're getting better. So, he's trying to preach the fact that everything's getting better, because he definitely wants the economy to keep going and to keep increasing, I guess, to just, bettering the economy. So I think those are his main motivations. Yeah. He doesn't want to mandate masks, basically.
Right, and I remember him mentioning that it's really, I think he should have said this, like actually verbatim said, constitutionally, the president does not have the power to do so, because he has said, especially in the first debate, that I'm leaving it up to the states to handle how they choose because each state's handling it differently. Now, Miller, what did Biden say?
Well, Biden's been very pro-mask, very pitching it as a patriotic point of view of, you wear one to protect the ones around you and your neighbors. He's saying that if he is elected president, he wants to make a mandate to make it mandatory to wear masks, follow CDC guidelines, all that. And I think for Trump, it's a little bit of a concern. He just had coronavirus. He was fine through it. He has, thankfully nothing happened to him. He's fine now. But, even there's rumors right now of Mike Pence, currently a staffer of his, got it infected with coronavirus. It's leading to people believing that maybe he should stop his campaigning right now. Right now he's still going on the trail, even though he might possibly be out to it. And so, that's a little bit concerning for some people. And also, it's a week before the elections, though. So does he want to take that risk of maybe not hitting those key stops that he might need to, in lieu of possibly his personal health or, again, the possibility of infecting others? Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Miller, about the situation about people's rights being, like, sort of not put on the back burner per se, but we do have a major pandemic going on. And what are we supposed to do? Is the federal government have the power? Do they have the power to mandate a mask wearing rule for 3 months? Is that even within the Constitution? Is that even allowed?
Look, I think it's sad that we frankly have to come to a point where we have to mandate it, and that it can't just be, again, a matter of you're looking out for the people around you and doing it. I don't think it's that hard to put on a mask, and the fact that we have to tell people to do so otherwise, I think, is the frustrating part. I think that's where the Democrats are maybe coming from with the whole idea of the mandate, is that, we have no problem when
we're from Jersey, though. Everyone wears a mask here.
Right,
I don't know. Maybe in certain states they aren't.
Right, and it's the other states that I think are more or less the concern. And you've seen New Jersey's case count go down to. So I think it's just the need of making sure that they have this base covered.
So, moving on from COVID, obviously they talked about the economy. I think that one of the bigger takeaways actually is Biden's statement on fracking and how he would get rid of it because based on the issues with climate change, we need to move towards a fueling platform that is not based on fossil fuels. So, Aaron, I'll start with you. Do you think that's going to hurt him in states like Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, and Texas?
I think his answer was an absolute game changer. I do want to start off by saying that he needs, I think, soon, before the election, he needs to come out and make himself completely clear, because in the past, this year, he has said that, he's obviously against fracking, but he said that he wants to abolish it. Recently, he said that he doesn't want any new fracking. So what does that mean? Does that mean that he's going to keep the fracking that's going on right now and not add to that? Or is he going to completely abolish it? I need, I don't need it, but I think he needs to absolutely come out for the American people and say what he means. And for Pennsylvania, I mean, that's major. I think he's going to need to maybe just make himself clear and say, this is what I meant, whatever, because that's going to put people out of jobs, obviously. It could be their only income, So I think for people who have already voted, they might be regretting it. I think people are extremely conflicted, and it's definitely a worry for Pennsylvania.
Right. Now, Miller, based on what Aaron just said, do you feel that I mean, Trump has made controversial statements on the issues of climate change and on coronavirus, and we all know that people who are concerned about these things will not be voting for him likely. Um, but the undecided voter, the person who's worried about their job as well as their safety, do you think that because Trump is pushing keeping the economy open and moving it forward, do you think that that is going to help him gain more support because people are more worried about their jobs?
I'm going to be honest, Chanley, I'm not sure. Only because of the fact that it really depends on where you are, how your state's handling it. The fact that coronavirus wasn't really turned over to the federal government and it wasn't approached on a massive scale, we don't know what things are going to be like, how much longer the average American can take this, but also, the willingness of, is it worth it to open back up now, to push for all these economic changes, to get people out, but then just have the cases shoot right back up again. There hasn't been, and again, I think this has been the country's main problem, is there hasn't been a united front with this coronavirus at all. And this is why other countries are able to reopen and operate, whereas here in the U.S., I don't know if it's because of an election year or just general politics, we just haven't been able to take one united front on dealing with these issues.
Well, I think my response would be simply because America is so large. I mean, we have 350 million people. We have 50 different states with 50 different laws, cultures, ideas. I mean, it's a lot easier for these smaller countries in Europe that have a population less than New Jersey to close down everything and do what they need to do. And not only that, as Aaron made great points earlier, it was about certain rights, as people do feel that their rights are, and to some degree, being infringed upon by these mandates. So that's why I think that we can't really have a united front on it because, as you said as well, Miller, it's an election year. It's been politicized by both parties. Unfortunately, we see that the politicians, because of the circumstances that we're in, that now, rather it be a true health issue for our people, it's about a political issue, which it should never be. That should never be the case.
And I think you're starting to see that kind of play out with some of these Senate and House of Representative votes that are going on this cycle, because you have people like Lindsey Graham that we were talking about earlier, worrying about how he's going to stand and how these opponents of states that are both either blue or red, depending on where they're at, their seats are up for grabs, and a lot of them are pretty flipped, or if that close to being flipped to the other side of the spectrum on how they're dealing with it. So I think either way, when we come out of this whole situation, and especially after this election, it's going to be really interesting to see the change in both parties and in the government in general, I think, how we handle these sort of issues.
Absolutely. Now, I got a couple questions left, and I'm just curious. So early voting has been taking place in many states. I already voted as well. I voted by mail, so if you haven't voted, I suggest you do it already. It is your civic duty as a citizen, but it's also your right not to vote, and I respect that as well. But for those who have already voted before the debate, after watching the debate, especially a lot of these undecided middle ground voters, do you think that maybe some of them are regretting their decision? I'll throw it to you, Aaron, first.
I think personally, I'm just hooked on the oil issue because for someone who is an independent or just, a swing voter, I think that was major, especially if that is, the industry that you work in. I think if you are a one issue voter, then it's not going to be a big deal. But for independents, for swing voters, COVID as well, because there's also going to be people who are confused about COVID because they'll be confused because Trump had it. And then he was wearing a mask. And then even last night at Justice Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation and her swearing in, there were people with masks. But at past rallies and the RNC, there were no masks. So then there's Biden who just wants masks, right? So I think for swing voters, they were definitely conflicted. But I definitely think that the oil issue is huge because that's not just Pennsylvania, that's other states like Oklahoma, Ohio, which was a pretty funny moment in the debate when Trump was, kind of interrupting Biden and he did his voice and he goes, Ohio. And he just was trying to, emphasize those other states that are big oil states. So I think they're definitely conflicted right now.
Right. So, Miller, you think anyone's regretting their decision if they made an early choice?
I think anyone that voted ahead of time already knew who they were voting for going into it.
Right.
I think the people that have waited it out are the ones that are the undecided, that are still waiting on it. I know I was watching CNN for the debate, and at the end of it, they had a panel of about 11 people that they had on, and I think out of the 11, there were 2 that were still undecided, that were still going to wait till after the debate.
Gotcha.
So I think even now, it's also weird, right? Because we canceled the second debate, and the first one, a lot of people felt went nowhere. So really, there hasn't been a ton of places to really platform their policies that they're going to be having, except for, again, this last debate, and then their rallies, which again, even then they don't really share a lot of their policies just due to the nature of the rallies. They're more or less meant for morale. And then 60 Minutes also is maybe the other closest place we got to answers with policies. But even then, Trump got out of his halfway through, and then even Pence and Kamala, I think from watching it, dodged some of the questions. So again,
right.
It's ultimately down to the fact that I think those who are undecided, they're still holding off on just a little bit longer to see what's going to happen next and to really make up their minds, I think.
I agree.
I like what Josh said about if you already did vote, you definitely know who you were going to vote for in the beginning. Because if you are a true Democrat or liberal, you're Biden all the way. And then same goes for Republicans. If you're an extreme conservative, you're going Trump, no matter what, because it's the overall policies that you want to see in the presidency.
Absolutely. I definitely agree. Really great points. And before we conclude this first episode of Hawk TV News Online, I want to get some predictions. So, who's going to win? I mean, we can almost guarantee that we're not going to find out next week. We won't know. We'll probably know a couple weeks afterwards. I mean, I hope it doesn't go until January. It's possible they can go on. I think that the longest that we could probably be waiting is about a month. I think that's
I think realistically that's on point.
Again,
depending on when dates cut off their dates for when they were allowing mail-in voting and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Of course, they have to double check everything. But I know, I mailed mine in. It took about 2.5 weeks to get the little approval that they got it.
Well, yeah, because once they get the ballots, it requires a process of receiving it to know that they got it,
right,
and then they have to process individual ballots. Yeah,
so
I did that for 8 hours a day. It takes a very long time where you're just sitting there and you go, wait a minute, I just went through 500 ballots over the course of 8 to 10 hours. It's brutal. So to all those workers in the Board of Elections, best of luck, honestly.
But yeah,
you have my utmost respect. So despite the fact that we will not know who's president probably for maybe a couple weeks after the general election, I'm just curious, Aaron, who do you think is going to win?
Just have no idea. I'm leaning towards Trump, just because when you really get down to it, the economy has done amazing the past 4 years, and I just think he has such a large support, and I think the silent majority is a real thing. But then again, on the other side, you see all these, celebrity endorsements, which are a huge influence on everyone that pays attention to, pop culture, I guess. And then it makes you, realize that, maybe it could go. Maybe we could have this big blue wave, but then there's also the red wave. So I have no idea. I'm going to say Trump, just because right now the polling is super close. And I think certain answers that Biden is giving is just not cutting it. And I also think that I think Kamala is who people are voting for, because people seem to be very uncomfortable with how Biden, his health. So I think either if you are a huge liberal and you're all the way left, then you want to see Kamala Harris in the vice president, position, and that's who you're kind of voting for. And you also want to see, Pelosi keep her spot, and it goes down to that. So right. I think I'm gonna say Trump, just because I think the silent majority could take this. And again, I'm gonna bring up the oil question. I think it was a game changer.
Right. Miller, what do you think?
Look, I don't. I'm gonna go there and again. Like I'm not sure. I don't want. Like I said earlier, I think people are afraid to get their hopes up either way. To the fact that we've seen it last year where we had the polling was doing so well. Everyone voted. The vote count majority was for Clinton, but then the electoral college was for Trump. And the polling as close as it's going to be, I just can't call it right now. For me, I just think the whole issues are going to ultimately come down to is how the coronavirus has been handled. How do we feel about that? And I think the other major thing that people are concerned about is healthcare and Obamacare, especially in a time like this. And how, Trump is claiming that he has a replacement, hasn't released any information about it, but that we have this replacement, that the Supreme Court might be voting on it in a couple weeks. That's concerning to a couple people. I think we're trying to think a little bit further ahead with that. And, but yeah, again, I'm not sure.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me this evening discussing the election. We'll find out hopefully as soon as possible. And the election, of course, is a week from today on November 3rd. So, guys, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having us on, Jenny.
Thanks.
That's it for this first installment of Hawk TV News Online. I'm Josh Chanley. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week.